We've been talking about a lot of topics lately relating to synchronization, relating to advanced frameworks for dealing with thread pools and so on, both synchronously and asynchronously. What we're going to do now is take a step back and discuss some of the more fundamental advanced topics related to Java threads themselves, which, as you know, are what underlie all the thread pool stuff we've been talking about. So we'll first start by discussing something called the Java thread lifecycle, and then we'll actually talk in more detail about the states that are involved in Java threading. The focus here will primarily involve starting and stopping Java threads. What are the steps involved? What are the states involved in starting and stopping Java threads? So a Java thread is a fairly complicated entity that involves lots of data structures, interacts with many other entities in the Java platform, and as we'll see in a minute, it involves different layers ranging from the hardware cores that do the actual computation up to the operating system kernel and various layers of middleware, all of which combine to give you a programming abstraction that is fairly convenient to work with. Although, as you've discovered, hopefully, it's even more convenient to work with some of the frameworks we've discussed, like the Java Executive Framework, to make it even better. The life cycle of a thread has to be managed carefully, and it also, as we'll see, is useful to understand what is going on under the hood with Java threads, because it'll help you make sense of the costs involved in dealing with threads. It'll help you get a better sense of what's going wrong when your threads get hung or things don't work in quite the way you expect. So we're going to kind of talk about the life cycle of a thread and how it works so you can manage it effectively. As we'll see shortly in the next part of this lesson, the thread transitions through various states in its life cycle based on the operations that you're performing. So when you create a thread, it goes to one state. When you start to run a thread, when you start the thread, it goes to another state. When it blocks on various things, like when it acquires a lock or wants to acquire a lock, when it wants to run, when it wants to wait, when it wants to time out, there's all these different states it can be in depending on what it is you do to the thread. And again, as we'll discuss, the two key parts of the Java lifecycle that are most important to understand for the purposes of this discussion are starting and stopping it. And you'll also see shortly that stopping the Java thread is actually the hardest thing to do, which is kind of funny, because you'd think that that would be pretty straightforward. You don't actually have to understand every last aspect of the Java thread internals in order to program threads effectively. That's one of the great things about abstraction. It can shield you from the details of how things work under the hood. However, your reputation and your value as a full-stack developer will increase if you know how threads work internally. It's just one of those things that people who are considered to be software masters, master software builders, and so on, like master Lego builders, understand these kinds of things. So if you want to learn more about what a full-stack developer is and why it's valuable, you might take a look at this link. Another reason to know this kind of stuff is that learning to program purely at the sort of app level, purely understanding things like web-based development and so on, while important, is also becoming heavily commoditized. So what happens when something becomes commoditized? A lot of people can compete for the same position, and therefore it's more difficult to differentiate yourself. So understanding some of these more subtle nuances is a good way to differentiate yourself, thereby keeping your job from being commoditized. Okay, so that's just a quick overview, just to kind of get things started. We will obviously go into a lot more detail in just a moment.